Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am most pleased to welcome you to a two-part series this week and next week on the topic, a discussion of the role of the artist in nature. We have two wonderful guests today, and they joined three other individuals back in the very severe winter we had, and they went out into nature and took no tools with them and came up with some incredibly artwork just by working with nature. I welcome to the program, first of all, Rachel Dolezal, who is an artist, and she also teaches at North Idaho College, and she's a graduate of Howard University with her second degree. And she does a lot of work for the Human Rights Center here. Rachel, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tony.
Delight to have you here.
Thank you.
And equally pleased to have Charles Miller, who grew up, and his father was a faculty member at North Idaho College and his mother at Eastern Washington University, and he's had years' experience in education. He's working on his thesis in political science at this time, and he was very involved with the music attached to this artwork. And welcome, we're delighted to have you here.
It's great to be here.
And I'm pleased to have our two regular panelists. First of all, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Welcome to the program. This is going to be interesting to talk about art and nature. Nature is so beautiful, actually. So, Rachel, my first question is for you. How did you come up with this idea?
Well, actually, I was initially inspired by an artist of the name Andy Goldsworthy. And Andy works with natural materials, does a lot of what's considered earthworks, which are installed pieces in a natural environment. And I was compelled by his works. And also, the second kind of piece to my inspiration was the emergence of a program at the Human Rights Center dealing with the environment and human rights. And I thought, you know, what a wonderful opportunity to explore natural resources in creating art rather than fall back on traditional, sometimes wasteful, art supplies for the exhibit.
That's very interesting. And Charles, you were collaborating on this project, but you weren't the only one. Tell us about some of the other people who were involved as well.
That's right. I helped out with some of the parts of it, the music part and some of the discussion about human rights and the environment we were considering as we worked on it. But there were a number of other people. Shawn was the photographer, doing a great job taking slide still shots and time lapse. And Dave, the other artist. So Rachel and Dave were really the two principal artists, and out in the field I was sort of collecting materials for them and assisting, and and there was another assistant as well. We were kind of the, go find the leaves and lichen or whatever it was in that point.
Thank you.
Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show, both of you. This is an extremely unique project and something that I have never seen before. And I enjoyed going to the opening of the exhibit when it was at the Human Rights Education Institute, and congratulations on doing this entire project. Rachel, give us a little lay of the land. You worked with a certain piece of property, so describe that for our viewers, what that location was like, what was available there in terms of artistic resources from nature, and a little bit about the time frame. I think you had a certain amount of time that you provided for the project where you could, from start to finish.
Right. Yeah, we worked at the Cougar Bay Preserve, and that is, the location is kind of an intersection of mountain and the marsh, essentially. So there are a lot of possibilities for materials. Another limitation or guiding factor, other than the land itself, was the season that we worked. So working in the winter made certain materials more available. Some things were buried under snow, so there are certain materials that were less available. Something like snow is not present in the summer, so that was an added material. But some of the undergrowth, specifically palette differences, exist in the winter, kind of more of a subtle palette. in maybe the spring or summer, there would be more pure hue colors coming out of the scenery. So.
And how big was this area?
The area that we worked in was probably about a 10-acre or so area. We had to go on snowshoe often to travel around Cougar Bay Preserve. I'm not sure what the acreage is of the whole preserve, but the part that we traveled was definitely within probably about 10 acres or so. So, yeah.
Charles, share with us some examples of some of the materials that you used in this exhibit.
Well, there's a lot of great materials, and that was what was really enjoyable about this was we walked out there and we didn't know what was going to happen. And so we started exploring the materials. And so I was sort of out there gathering stuff. We collected cattails, was an interesting material because we're right on the marsh. And so we just start to explore them. Cattails and the reed grass, or the sort of the obvious one was the snow because it's just, you know, just tremendous winter. But leaves, there was these thin leaves that had fallen and then had sort of slowly decomposed and were just a thin, very delicate form. We worked with sticks, we worked with lichen that, you know, was still there on the trees. And so, yeah, there was just a lot of really fascinating materials we could have kept working with. There were old trees that had burned that we used, and you know, various things.
And how much time did you dedicate to this project from start to finish?
Well, we were out there for several weekends. We'd go out, we'd get there early at about 6 in the morning before sunrise and stay there till dark. And so we went out 3 weekends in a row, Saturdays, and then the last we stayed 2 days, both Saturday and Sunday.
And was there ever a time during that time period when animals became part of the art project?
Well, we were certainly aware of that. There was, you know, 5 of us, and we were talking about what we were doing, and had cameras, and so we were, you know, fairly noisy doing that to a point. But we were definitely aware of the ecosystem and the animals there, the creatures that live in the wetlands, and mice and other creatures that would be there under the snow. And we'd get there, we'd hear owls in the early morning and things of that nature. So at times, certainly the awareness of that affected the work a lot.
Rachel, there's no way to do this program without visuals, because our viewers, we would not do that to them, that we couldn't show your work. And so I'm going to ask the staff to put up we're going to do 25 slides. And if you'll take us through those, they'll come up on the screen in a second. And here's the first one. Rachel, if you'll describe these for us.
Sure. Yeah, this particular image is at the moment of discovering the cattails as a material source. And essentially our selection of materials was based on some specific guidelines. We were not going to destroy any living things, any living materials. So we used only materials that were already last year's growth, you know, old growth that already died. So we're exploring the cattails, and as we went to the marsh to gather reeds, we were initially thinking of the leaves per se, the reeds of the cattails rather than the heads.
Let's move on to the next slide so you can get through these.
All right. This is a particular piece that is a braid of grass from the marsh. So it's just marsh grass braided and then laid to kind of follow the path of the creek that was thawing.
So you did that. You developed, created
the grass
it. Yes.
is braided.
The next one will show the area itself, and you can see it's a very snowy place.
Yeah, this is the marsh, and this is where the cattails were gathered. And the top of the cattails remind us of animal forms, which the first slide kind of showed a paw form. So this is kind of the human. There's a gatherer. Charles is actually out there in nature, small human form, large nature. So the emphasis is on the natural world.
The next slide, number 4.
This is the other artist, Dave Gover, and he was experimenting in this particular piece with negative space in the snow, so carving out shapes to look through, kind of like window forms.
And the fifth one?
This is Dave once again, working this time on a rock and trying to explore how snow adheres to the surface when pressed up against the rock. The temperatures are very cold. You notice that we're working with fingerless gloves, and there's a need to touch the material directly with our fingers often in order to control it. So some cold fingertips.
Real challenge, and the photographer's taking all this while you're doing this.
Right.
And here is Dave again, I believe.
Yes, this is Dave, and this shows the blizzard-like condition. This is the first day that we were working, and he's kind of turning away. Once again, sort of a conceptual shot, a moment in time the photographer captured.
And number 7?
This was one of the first projects we did, and there are snow forms that create negative space forms in between the white forms. And we created a whole series of these. Dave here is standing up. What we did is we broke the snow crust, the surface crust, and then stood it up. So these are actually just kind of raw, just broken pieces and then stood up. So it's
and would they stay there very long? Or?
By the end of the day, they were gone.
Yeah, so you had to work fast and get them
Yes,
captured fast.
Right.
Okay, our next slide.
This particular piece reminds me of Paleolithic art, which is Old Stone Age cave paintings, kind of the smearing, rubbing phase in art history. And the difference with this particular piece is that it was accidental, because this is how we cleaned our hands after working with mud. So I just cleaned my hands in the snow, and the photographer shot the photo right after doing that. Another difference with the cave paintings in this particular piece is that these handprints are gone now.
Yes. And our next one?
This is a very beautiful image showing the ice and the snow crust as it was the creeks were beginning to thaw. And certainly the landscape changed as we were working through the month of February.
Most interesting. Number 10?
This piece is actually tunneled underneath of the snow, and using a stick as a tool. Again, we just used fingernails, sticks, teeth, rocks. There were no man-made tools. We didn't bring anything to the site. You
did it all just from yourself.
Hands-on.
And what's nature?
Right. And this kind of, is the underground habitat of the mice. And somebody at the opening reception said it looked kind of also like a sweat lodge or a womb, or a decision-making process, different choices, and then moving toward one goal. So it's kind of a conceptual piece.
Number 11?
This is another piece done from under the snow, and when I was carving this with a stick, there's this thin crystal crust on the top of the snow, and the snow just falling in my face because I had to lay on my back to create it directly overhead. And this is a window to the sky.
And the 12th one?
This is an image. Sometimes we found meandering forms in the natural landscape that answered to other works that we were creating. And so using the landscape actually as the third artist, Dave, Gover, myself, and Cougar Bay Preserve were the 3 artists. So this is a composition that the landscape itself created perfectly.
And our next one?
This is the finished piece. Earlier we saw Dave kind of pressing the snow onto the rock, and this is what adornment he came up with as kind of a necklace adorning the rock, and there are sticks pressed into the snow as well. And this lasted just 1 week, and so it was gone.
But these are snow
sculpted forms with kind of tribal motif in terms of the addition of sticks, and answers somewhat to native jewelry.
And we have a wonderful photograph of you in number 14.
This shows the snow crust forms as we're standing them up, and the delicateness of just placing them and not overworking them. I mean, certainly if there's any pressure put on the form, it crumbles. So it's very carefully handled.
As a great artist would do in a gallery, too.
Right.
This is number 15.
This shows a more frontal view, and you can kind of see how the smaller forms are interacting with the larger forms and creating, once again, kind of some negative space. And the forms kind of took up personalities, maybe ancestral beings or just abstract forms. It's very interpretive.
And number 16.
This is another fabulous shot that Shawn Gust, the photographer, took, and you can see in the right upper 2/3 of the photo kind of a blue, almost a teal blue cast to the snow. And in the lower left corner, kind of almost a yellow. And the snow had so much color in it. It was really fabulous and really inspired a lot of the other works.
Number 17.
This is the burnt stump that Charles referred to using burned wood earlier. And we just found this stump, had a piece of surviving bark that was uncharred, and kind of outlined that. It created almost a mother-child form. And this is Dave Gover standing next to that. You'll notice the wool serape and our need to stay warm, of course, while we're creating, and kind of also blending in with the landscape. We wore mostly neutral tones, kind of to just become part of the scenery. So,
The 18th slide.
this piece is, well, it may appear to be rocks or stones stacked. It's snow rolled in mud that we found kind of alongside of a road, and these lasted. There are a series of these coming up, and this particular one lasted just a few seconds, and some of them never got photographed because they're so short-lived. The mud actually caused the snow to start breaking down. So this is another one, and notice that with rocks, this type of a bending vertical axis would not be possible.
Right.
The very heavy forms on the brink of falling, really.
Yeah, in one of your lectures you gave, talk about how quickly you had to do them, how quickly you had to capture them. That's
right,
amazing.
Right.
It's not a lasting artwork.
Right, yeah. It brings up issues of, or thoughts of impermanence, or
Yes.
kind of the ephemeral nature of some of the materials we're working with.
Here was another one, and here it comes. You had
Yeah,
several of these.
each of these have a personality, a very distinct. It's almost like you
Yes.
could give them a human name. And this one, again, having a curved vertical axis. This one really, this large form perched on top of that very small pebble.
And the next one has a real interesting, I think, characteristic to it.
Yeah, it does. The light filtering over the top of it
Right.
definitely gives it kind of a spiritual
and
sense, almost like a totem or a memorial.
And a different color to each one of those.
Right. Yeah, just depending on how the snow took
Right.
the mud.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have two more.
This is kind of back to those snow forms and experimenting with excavating areas within the form. These lasted only a matter of minutes. They were very short-lived. But
And our 25th slide for today.
now this slide is really interesting. This is a very large spiral. It's an entire bale of hay that fell off of a truck somehow and rolled down next to the Marsh at Cougar Bay Preserve. We found it, and because it's so cold, we're able to get it attached to one of the vehicles and get it down the highway past the marsh and into this region where there's this nice, almost white watercolor paper of snow. And Dave and Ron, one of the assistants, walked the spiral and kind of carried out bundles of the hay, armfuls of it, masquerade style, and placed it. And there are many hikers that were stunned by this piece. Did you see the UFO? But it's kind of very natural, pleasing spiral, kind of the curve of a snail shell.
Just amazing how
Large
creative
form.
it is, and how you use different materials that were in nature. Before going back to Chanel, I do want to recognize one thing. I believe I'm correct that you worked with a wonderful, or got permission from a wonderful organization. That's the Nature Conservancy. I believe they
correct.
gave you permission to work there.
Yes, we actually had a contract with them that stipulated some of these things, like using only materials that were non-living and not removing materials from the preserve. And
They do work all over the world. They're an amazing group.
they're very good to work with. Yes.
Janelle Burke.
You worked with a photographer, and so at what point did you say, I'm finished, come take the picture now? Rachel, can you tell us about that? How did that work for you?
Yeah, well, at times there is a finished composition that the artist is able to say, okay, now it's ready to be photographed. Other times the photographs were kind of just momentary chance, like the handprints in the snow. So the photographer was composing as the artists were composing, kind of looking for that moment of truth. We're all listening to the space, the materials, and just waiting for what would happen. So at any given moment, a composition could be ready. So he was ready. There were wool hats on the cameras because it was snowing so hard, and he had a time-lapse camera set up to document the process, the making of all the works. So that caught some of the works in progress, and he could extract a still from that particular camera. He was also shooting large format film for most of the stills. So, you know, he captured pretty much everything involving the process and the finished compositions.
Thank you. And Charles, you set some music to these wonderful photographs. How did you decide on that? And did you use just one instrument, or did you use more than one instrument? How did you go about that?
Well, I was out there with them, of course, and so as we were working and as I was gathering material, I was just trying to be sort of mindful and aware of what we were doing and the energy of what was happening. And then I'd go back home and just kind of think about what we did that day and generate some ideas. So I did that over the several weeks, and then after we had finished it, we got the slideshow, and I looked at that, and then I sat down and just recorded it with just a guitar, a single guitar.
And styles of music, did you do classical and your own compositions, or how did you go about that?
Yeah, it was, well, I studied classically, but it was more of an atmospheric sound, I'd say, than a true classical sound. I wanted something that was kind of meditative and that would kind of get to the space and openness that we had there and that we felt as we were working on the pieces. So
very natural.
It was great. It was fun.
Except for the cold weather. That would come from me, wouldn't it? Erna Reinhardt.
Your project had so many different elements to it. It had the real world experience that was out in nature. You have the photo exhibit. I think you have the slideshow set to music. There must have been a lot of planning that went into this project ahead of time. So share with us, did you know that you were going to come out with all of those finished pieces at the very beginning? And just share with us how the planning process worked.
Yeah, well, planning started back in November, and we executed the project in February. So there were several months I wrote proposals to get funding and kind of trying to conceive of how things would be organized while leaving this large space for freedom of expression and innovation and learning from the landscape itself. So I know that working with another artist as well in a collaborative sense kind of dictates some sense of flexibility. So we wanted to not pre-plan. We did not do sketches or decide how many projects were going to result from the overall project. We showed up, made ourselves available, listened to the landscape, and started exploring, and it organically evolved from there.
Excellent. But you knew that you were going to do the real life presentation, the photography,
right?
The end product.
Yes, there was definitely a plan. Certainly with most of these pieces, the only way they survive is through the photography and the time-lapse DVD with the music. That is the documentation of the experience. Yes. So the experience itself is something only the people there, the 5-person crew, it has internalized to some degree, but this is a way of sharing it with the public. So
excellent.
I find it breathtaking. Good news is we're back next week, and you have more of your artwork to show. But in the time we have left, I have a very strong suspicion that our wonderful viewers are saying, is this going to be somewhere where I can see it? So I know it's been at the Human Rights Center here in Coeur d'Alene, and you did a program. It was not only showing the exhibit, but also all of you speaking and explaining the experience. Will it be available for others to see?
Well, it is certainly available for exhibit booking.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get at.
So yeah, it hasn't been scheduled to be shown at an additional location. In fact, at this very moment, it's still being shown at the Human Rights Education Institute.
When we're taping the program, but it airs later.
Right,
so
exactly.
It won't be it then.
So right. So it's available.
Good.
For viewing, and the exhibit includes the DVD, which is a multimedia exhibit, and then also the still photography exhibit, which prints in large 24 by 36 size.
I'm going to have you do two things. One, give your phone number, and they'll put it on the screen. We also have a website, and so if they put that up, there'll be a visual of it too. But first, let's give it your phone number.
Sure. Yeah, it's area code 208-691-1847.
So that's here in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, 208-691-1847. And your website
is the 3Ws dot Rachel Dolezal, which is RACHELDOLEZAL.info, INFO.
And so they put that up too. So
nice. And
of course, viewers could always contact us here, and we would also get them in touch with you. I just think that this is such an incredibly, I would say, in many ways unique. That as an exhibit that people should be enjoyed, and they could also book it. And we have a lot of artists and people who are patrons of the arts in the area, and so maybe they will get in touch with you. Again, I want to thank you both for being on the program today, and I thank our panel for, as always, their very outstanding questions. And we've been doing this program, it's in its 37th year, and every year we do something we've never done before, and we've never done this before. It's unique, I think, in the sense of going out in the middle of a bad winter and coming up with such incredible creative work. Thank you both very much, and we look forward to having you back again next week. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this program as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you, and please be with us again next week when we'll do the second part of this series on this incredible artwork with nature. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.